called the talk Comparing, Compiling, and Critical Thinking because that's essentially what this very, very simple ChatGPT task is doing. And I've used 210 because I'm familiar with it. So that's the technical and professional writing course. Okay, so you probably know that ChatGPT will generate a different text every time you hit generate. And if you get multiple generations, multiple iterations, you can compare them. And when you do that, you begin to see the crazy things that it's telling you. So it's famous for, as they say, hallucinating. That means it makes mistakes. And so if you ask your class to produce multiple iterations, they're going to be able to find these kinds of mistakes. And then just asking them to compare the different texts will create in them an awareness of the value of ChatGPT, but also the limitations. All right, so in 210, we write an IMRAD paper. And to do that, we ask our students to do an online questionnaire or survey. And of course, this is an interesting task. Nobody's born writing a good survey questions. At the time that I wrote this PowerPoint presentation, we weren't at the stage of doing methods with our students yet. So I just did the 24 iterations myself. But I would have asked students, just to get onto ChatGPT and ask it, how do I write a good internet questionnaire? And then I would ask them to compile all of the 24 students in the class, 24 different iterations of answers. And that's going to point up the fact that you need to be sort of intellectually in charge of the process because you need to be aware of the problems in what it generates. And then there's a lot of differences between the very generic results that you get off ChatGPT and good quality academic or technical work. All right, so just a warning about this PowerPoint. At the moment, AI, large language model AIs can generate text, but they have no reality testing. That's right now. In the next year or two, those better chatbots will emerge, and they may have better ontology. And then this PowerPoint will kind of be expired. All right, so I was assuming.
Christina, what did you mean by reality checking?
Well, a large language model AI is kind of like a autocomplete on steroids. So we assume ChatGPT uses open source data of some kind, but it will predict what comes next in the sentence and in the paragraph. And it is very, very, very good at that because it's been trained on trillions of words. But it can't actually check whether or not what it says is true. So it doesn't think, it doesn't fact check, it doesn't check, it just produces words. Does that make sense, Carlos?
Absolutely, thank you.
Okay, so this is its famous, the mistakes it makes, it hallucinates. And we will see that in this PowerPoint, the mistakes it made here. All right, so based on the surveys that we're doing in the department, I kind of made some assumptions about our goals. We want to use AI in our courses where it's valuable, but we also want to limit just the casual, unthinking use of ChatGPT in producing assignments. We want to support our students in using AI, but to respond analytically to course content. But they need to critically assess the quality of that text because the quality is not always good. We want to help them develop a sense of what AI is useful for and what it's not good for. And they need to, essentially their brain needs to stay critically in charge of their coursework. And if they're going to develop their intellectual abilities, now that they're at this point in their youth and their career, they need to stay in charge. So those were my assumptions about what we want. Okay, so as I said, for an IMRAD paper in 210, we asked them to do a survey. So the teacher's role would be to ask the students to get on to ChatGPT, all 24 of them, and produce 24 different versions of the answer to this question: how do you write a good internet survey? And then the teacher would say, okay, so please put your versions together, and I want you to get a Google Doc up together and itemize the steps. So what are the steps in writing a good internet survey? And then also we're going to look at what sorts of questions do you ask in an internet survey. And of course, ChatGPT, all it does is produce words, so it will produce words. And when they begin to compare and compile, it allows the teacher to begin to identify the difference between academic or technical registers and very general or business registers, the sorts of wordings that you get off ChatGPT. And it allows the teacher to discuss, point out what AI is good for and what it's not good for. And it helps students to begin to think critically about the content that gets generated. All right, so one of the first things that is very, very evident when you ask ChatGPT 24 times, how do you make a good internet survey, is that you get different numbers of steps. So in fact, I did this almost 100 times, and I got anything between 4 and 14 steps. But in the first 24, which I'm taking as this class, I got an average of about 8 steps. But so if the students do this, they will see that there are not the same number of steps, and they will feel confused. And so the teacher's role then would be to allow them to feel confused and acknowledge the confusion and then say, okay, so what have we learned? And students are going to begin to realize that they can't necessarily rely on a single iteration, that if they get onto ChatGPT and ask the question, how do I make a good survey? One version of the answer is not necessarily reliable. So this is exactly Carlos's question. ChatGPT, chatbots, they aren't thinking about it. They're just producing words, likely words. All right, so how many steps is puzzling? Now, in the first 24 iterations, there were 14 different steps. So here they are. And so if you only get 12, if you only get 8 of the 12, then you're aware that you're missing something. So then again, the teacher can ask the students to identify and put the steps in the right order, and they're likely to choose more than 8. Now, I've got using incentives in blue because in fact, we don't use incentives most of the time in academic or technical surveys. So this step recommended things like offer respondents a promotional code, a small financial reward, some kind of discount coupon, and these kinds of things. So this is assuming that the question applies to market research. We'll come back to that in a moment. But you can see that if you got 7, 8, 9, or 10 steps, and you discover that there are 12 in the group, the student is likely to begin to see the need for critical thinking. Right, so then there's the question of what order do the steps go in? Now, in all of the iterations that I produced, figure out your research objective was the first step in all cases. But after that, all of the steps were differently ordered. So again, the result is likely to be that the students will disagree about what orders things should go in. So for example, step 2, about half of them said, write your questions. About half of them said, figure out what language, you need to be quite careful what language you write it in. About 20%, under 20% said you need to analyze your target audience. Now, in academic writing, we would probably put this step next. There was one iteration which put this step last. So that would, of course, provide a wonderful opportunity for the teacher to say, well, we think that should probably go a little earlier. And then a certain number of them talked about the software platform that you might want to use to put your internet survey on. All right, so you've got the same problem with step 3 and step 4. All right, so then this allows the teacher and the students together to begin to evaluate the problems and to see what are the insufficiencies of ChatGPT are. And it's the same with all the other steps. All right, so you get a variety of issues coming up with the order of steps. And at this point, it's useful to point out to students the difference between market or business research, marketing surveys, and academic surveys. So a lot of the examples that ChatGPT has been trained on come from a very general, non-technical, non-academic level of what's out there. We're not sure what ChatGPT is trained on, but probably what's out there on the internet. It also is your opportunity to discuss the fact that we don't use incentives very rarely in academic research, and the reasons why we don't pay people or we don't offer them products and so on to participate. And then it also offers us an opportunity to provide some quality sources, some guidance in order to establish the academic or the technical norms that we are interested in establishing. So this puts into students' minds the fact that ChatGPT isn't necessarily what they need in the classroom. Now, we mentioned errors. In this particular case, one of the interesting omissions was that ChatGPT rarely discussed the ethics of asking people questions. So it was only present in a small number of the iterations. Also, one of the most fundamental errors that it made was to make statements like ensure anonymity and confidentiality. So one cannot have both of those things at once. Anonymity means that you don't know their names. Confidentiality means that you know their names and you're not telling anyone, and you anonymize things. So a lot of those statements looked at from the point of view of an academic research project or a technical research project, that's simply an error. All right, so whatever topic you're working on, you probably won't be asking students to write an internet survey, but whatever topic you're working on, look for the errors, because then, and point them out very carefully, because that way students will see that using chatbots naively entails a certain amount of risk. Another area that it's important to look at is the language. So ChatGPT will give different definitions of what it means to ask a question, different descriptions of what kinds of questions asked, different advice, and it gives it all in this tremendously confident tone or voice. And yet the range of what it's actually saying is extraordinarily wide. So in the kind of writing we teach, word choice is absolutely crucial in establishing meaning. So again, the point here is to demonstrate to students and make sure that they really see that just casual use of chatbot text is really not a good choice. So here's an example. This one just made me laugh when I put it together. So what does it mean? What does it say under the step, write good questions? All right, so imagine trying to follow this advice. When the students compile, what does it mean to write good questions? You get use closed questions, use open questions, use opinion questions, use yes, no questions, only ask the most important questions, only ask 10 to 15 questions, ask multiple choice questions, use a mix of qualitative and quantitative questions, use ranking scales, use rating scale, etc. Okay, so you can see that this is impossible. No person can follow this advice. And it leaves the student, when you get the multiple iterations together and you compile that advice, you can see that the students will be confused. There are also some very interesting questions if you're an academic in terms of avoid personal questions, avoid discouraging questions, and don't ask about sensitive topics. Now, for this particular topic, you might not come across this, but in fact, we often do ask those kinds of questions. We just handle it very carefully. All right, so again, when compiling this material, students are going to feel confused and they're going to need guidance. All right, so allow them to experience the confusion and start a discussion about the downside of chatbots. And be sure to have good sources that are available. So in our case, we have a textbook, Merkle, and we have chapter 6 on survey question types and so on. When you do whatever example you're doing, you will have your sources as well. So then you can get students to compare what they got from ChatGPT and what they can see in the source book you're using. And it will allow you opportunities to clarify what we want them to do and how to make the decision about using material that you use from chatbots. Now, one of the interesting things about the ChatGPT content was that it only mentioned it in about half of the cases, a little over half the cases mentioned that we need to understand our target respondents. In academic or technical surveys, this is critical. The demographic profile of your target respondents is crucial and you cannot leave it out. So again, this is a question of register. Chatbots are trained on casual, non-academic, generalist kind of sources and some business sources. So this provides you with the opportunity to bring these same points home to students. Now, you might be interested in whether or not it makes any difference if you put the word academic in there, and I did try that. So I redid the whole thing with the word academic. How do you write a good academic internet questionnaire? So I generated that 24 times. There's still only 8 mentions of getting consent out of 24, so that's a quarter of the time. That's a really big oversight. And only 4 use the word informed. There's only 1 use of the word revise in the entire corpus, and fewer sections on advising people when writing good questions. There's less detail on incentives, but the incentives are still there, and the whole issue of error with confidentiality and anonymity remains. So bottom line, ChatGPT has been trained on quite general and a certain number of business sources. So this allows us an opportunity, at least right now, to point this out to our students. All right, so here's our learning objectives from 210. We want to identify and understand the structures and functions of primary genres of technical writing. Okay, survey is part of that. Students will see that AI can help. It's a place to start, but it really cannot be relied on to help them generate a good survey. We want our second learning objective, analyze and adapt to the constraints of specific rhetorical situations, including audiences, purpose, modality, and use. And clearly students will see that they have to stay in charge of understanding, the purpose of their survey and their target respondents. And more generally, they'll see that it did not distinguish between market and technical registers, and that it makes mistakes. And they're more likely to use the textbook to refer to. All right, so this is a 210 example. It's one example. We teach so many different classes, so many different topics in the writing program here. But you should be able to think of ways, at least in some cases, in some of the other classes, to structure exercises that will require this kind of comparison and this kind of compilation, and that it will be productive. It will be productive of confusion, which is a productive, good thing. And so then you can be ready to direct students to solve the problem through critical thinking and the use of good sources. In at least some cases, it will be able to highlight errors. So this is when ChatGPT hallucinates. In the next talk, I asked ChatGPT, why did Elizabeth marry Mr. Darcy? I got some hilarious answers, including some wonderful errors. So one does find these errors. More sophisticated issues are that ChatGPT cannot separate academic from everyday kind of business word choices. So it's no good at distinguishing register either at the level of language or at the level of genre. All right, so as I said, AI with effective ontology is only a couple of years away. So what I've just described has an expiry date ticking, a clock ticking on it. We teachers, we really cannot afford not to get skilled up. So that's one of my biggest things that I want to say, that we must learn how to use these tools, and we must be out there in front of our students in using them. AI writes right now in the voice of the non-academic member of the public. So we can, at this point, we can foreground diction, genre, and argument. Humans are still in charge of this. If we theme our courses, and we are more likely to be able to identify the errors that happen when ChatGPT and other chatbots hallucinate. The reality is that our students are likely still to use it casually. And so they will get away with those errors if course content is at the same kind of level of the non-academic generalist that ChatGPT is at. So we need to frame our tasks to really foreground critical thinking and analysis.